Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Asian College of Journalism and Bloomberg, I warmly welcome you all to the Climate Change Media Hub workshop on climate finance, challenges and opportunities in the Global South. Thank you for joining us here at the MS Subbalakshmi Auditorium and to those attending online. To begin the program, I invite Mr. Sashi Kumar, Chairman, Media Development Foundation and Asian College of Journalism, to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Samviti, and a very good morning to everyone. It's indeed a pleasure to have very distinguished panelists and speakers here today to discuss an area of climate change which perhaps is not as discussed in the public realm as the imminent dangers it poses. It was very heartening, in fact, to read this morning in the newspaper that a survey held in Chennai shows that 85% of the sample size are of people. It's a cross-section of the people in Chennai are aware and concerned about climate change and the way it's affecting their lives and livelihoods and health and other parameters of life. So there was a time when there was this binary between climate change and development. And I was one of those skeptics, I must admit, initially, because there were these terms like climate change fundamentalists who were seen as anti-development, who were obstacles to development, particularly in a developing society. Now, things have radically changed. There's been a paradigm shift, and the impinging reality of climate change globally, as well as in our own environment, we can see it, we can hear it, we can feel it. We can see the weather patterns changing, we can see the unpredictability of weather and the way it takes a toll on society. So it is indeed, I think there are two buzzwords in the media today, and they're not in a fashionable sense, but in a substantive sense. One is climate change and the other is AI. And at the Asian College of Journalism, we therefore decided to center plank, if you like, climate change is one of the important issues that we must engage with. And that is the context of the Climate Change Media Hub at the ACJ, which is work in progress. We've just started this initiative late last year, effectively in November last year. It's an idea that we formulated, and luckily for us, we had some help from the German government as well. So over the next 4 years or so, we'll be building this Climate Change Media Hub at the ACJ, which essentially will become, I believe, a platform, a go-to place, particularly for media practitioners, journalists, and other forms of media, maybe documentary filmmakers, maybe those who are engaged in other forms of publicity, and so on and so forth. We're engaging in terms of the public, in terms of public awareness of what's happening around us, and give them the resources, raw material, and a forum, toolkits perhaps for media practitioners on how to critically evaluate issues relating to climate change and so on and so forth. I won't go into details on that. So this workshop or seminar is being held under the auspices of the ACJ Bloomberg program at the ACJ. And in fact, Kushbu Narayan, who is the dean of the ACJ Bloomberg program, should legitimately be welcoming you, but I guess I'm hauled here because in my position as chairperson. And therefore, it's an area of particular interest to us, and it will be, I think, a strong leitmotif, if you like, of the curriculum at the ACJ, of our engagement academically and in terms of interaction with society over the next few years. I'm very, very happy to welcome our distinguished speakers today, beginning with our keynote speaker, Mr. Chandra Bhushan, who is CEO of iForest. iForest being an acronym for International Forum for Environment, Sustainability and Technology, who has come from Delhi, and it's very kind of him to spare the time and to be here with us to talk to the issue, and I'm sure it's going to be a very edifying experience listening to him. We then have 2 substantive sessions after that. The one before lunch break is on climate finance today, the failure and the imperative, by Professor C.P. Chandrasekhar, who is Emeritus Professor, Center for Economic Studies and Planning, JNU, an economist of renown in India and across the world. We're also privileged that he's a trustee of the Media Development Foundation, which runs the ACJ, and he's going to be talking to the subject in the first section, and the session is being moderated by Mr. Kundan Pandey, who is in fact the main speaker for the next session in the afternoon. And I'm sorry, Archana Chaudhary is a speaker for the next session in the afternoon, before the lunch break. And she is going to speak on the nature of investments needed for India's green transition. Archana Chaudhary is Associate Director, Climate Trends. She spent long years with the media, with journalism itself, about 17 years with Bloomberg, since this is associated with Bloomberg, ACJ Bloomberg program. And so it'll be very interesting. I'll be looking forward to listening to what she has to say about the nature of investments needed for India's green transition, with which she is very closely linked and engaged. And then in the post-lunch period, we have just one session in the afternoon. That, as I mentioned, was by Mr. Kundan Pandey on ESG disclosures and their impact on industrial emissions and sustainable finance. Kundan Pandey is senior editor, Monga Bay of India, and that session will be moderated by a resident fellow at the Climate Change Hub on the media, who is also an alumna of the ACJ, Shreya Raman. So we look forward to a very rich and rewarding day in terms of the issue of the finance, broad overarching idea of finance of climate change. And I, like you, am really looking forward to each of these sessions. Once again, a very big thank you to the speakers, also to our students who have turned up in good numbers on a Saturday morning, and to our other guests who have responded to our invitation and are here, the media and everyone else. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Ms. Preeti Mehra, Project Lead, Climate Change Media Hub, ACJ, to introduce our keynote speaker.
Mr. Chandra Bhushan is our keynote speaker today. He is one of India's foremost environment and climate change experts, and he's the president and CEO of the International Forum for Environment, Sustainability and Technology, which is popularly called iForest. For the past 2.5 decades, Mr. Bhushan has advanced the environmental agenda through research, writing, and public policy advocacy. His scope of work encompasses global and local issues, from climate change and ozone depletion to industrial pollution and environmental governance. He has authored and co-authored 20 books, more than 60 reports, and is a columnist for India's leading newspapers. In 2017, he was conferred with the Ozone Award for his contribution to the Kigali Amendments. We are very lucky to have him here today, and I think you all will really gain from what he has to say. Thank you so much. Over to you, sir.
Okay. First of all, let me thank Shri Shashi Kumar, Preeti, Lakshmi, friends and colleagues from Asian College of Journalism for inviting me to this, I think, a very important workshop for me, because I don't get too much I interact a lot with journalists, but I do not get too many opportunities to interact with upcoming journalists. And when this invitation came to me, I thought it was an important opportunity for me to talk to you about an important narrative. See, climate change, human civilization is about narrative. I hope all of you know. We like stories. Our civilization is defined by stories, right? The way we write that story, the way we convey that story, shapes civilization. And we are at that important juncture in human civilization where narrative will have to change if we really want to continue the prosperity that we have seen in 150 years. People tell me that there are so many problems in the world. If you read the newspaper, you will feel as if everything is going wrong in the world. But if you look at a 1,000-year history of human civilization, we are probably at the best time in our history. We are more educated, more free, better fed, higher life expectancy, more freedom and rights to women than ever in our history. We are fighting and killing less than ever we did in our history, even with all the wars that you see. So on a historical lens, if you see, humanity is probably at the best time it ever had. There was no Ramarajya in the past. Okay? The Ramarajya is going to happen in the future if we get the narrative right. So I am here to talk about climate change because I believe the narrative has to change. Okay? And I think journalists have now, at least in the age of social media where you have all kinds of information, credible voice is very important now. Voice that people can trust. And that can, if people want to know something, then they will go to those voices. And those voices will come from rooms like these. Those voices will not come from a podcaster or someone who is just commenting on social media, on Twitter or LinkedIn, on Instagram. Okay? Those voices will come from people who are trained in journalism, who understand ethics of journalism, who understand the value of numbers and research and facts. Most people don't. Okay? So it is important. So I'm really excited to be here with you. And I want to talk about a story that you need to write more and more as you progress in your career. It is about climate change, of course. And we need to write about important issues like glaciers melting or extreme rainfall or impact of climate change on human beings, on heat wave. Those are important issues. But we need to write about money. Okay. The story that we do not write is about money and its relationship with climate change. And I'm going to tell you how to write that story, okay? And why it is important to write that story. Okay. And specifically, I'm going to discuss how global financial system is structured, how it moves capital, and most importantly, how it moves capital exactly in the opposite direction of where it is required, and why it does so. Many of the economists will disagree with me. Okay? They will say that you do not understand the fundamentals of economics. But I think the narrative going ahead in the world will have to inverse the logic of economics. Economics cannot be only about short return and reward. That's what it is right now. If we want to solve civilizational problem, then we will need civilizational answer. We need an answer that will make sure that human civilization flourishes. In the current context, it doesn't. It will not. Let me start, and therefore I have called this my lecture, The Inverse Logic of the Market. Okay? So let me start by saying a very basic question: what is climate finance? Now, if you look at the definition of climate finance, basically it says that anything which reduces greenhouse gas emission or enhances the ability of human beings to adapt to the impact of climate change is climate finance. That's it. Simple. Anything which mitigates climate change and adapts to climate change is climate finance. This is the definition, which is a UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, definition on climate finance. Wherever you are putting money to reduce emissions or to avoid emission, like you are spending in renewable energy, battery storage, EVs, you are spending in closing coal-based thermal power plant, coal mines, stopping oil wells, they all should be called climate finance. And if you are building seawall and anything that is going to adapt, which enables us to adapt to the impact of climate change, is climate finance. This is what the broad definition is. But here is the thing. The broad description is where the global agreement ends. After that, it is only disagreement. So this broad definition, everyone agrees. But the moment you start digging in, you start looking at the specifics, the disagreement starts. Okay? And let me tell you what the disagreements are. First of all, there's disagreement on what should be included and what should be excluded, and I'll give you some examples. Okay? Should climate finance be only government, public money? Should it be private money? Okay. Should it be grant or should it be loan? Okay. Is concessional loan climate finance? There's a list on every issue of climate finance. There are disagreements. Okay. And these are not academic, frankly. Okay. These disagreements are very much embedded in every aspect of market and international negotiations. So let me repeat again. It is embedded in the market, the way market defines climate finance, and international agreement, which means the way governments are fighting over what climate finance is. So that this is a very, very deep embedded disagreement which is there. And the fact is there is no universal agreed definition of climate finance. Broad definition is there. But that broad definition is not good enough. You need a much more detailed definition, parameters that does not exist. Okay? So there's no universal definition. And this, ambiguity is not accidental. That is another story. This ambiguity is very politically useful. Okay? Because it allows countries to report climate finance when everyone disagrees with the definition of climate finance. So for example, you would have heard that last year, developed countries have met their target of $100 billion that they had pledged to developing countries. All of you, this was a headline everywhere, that for the first time, developed countries have met their pledge of giving $100 billion of climate finance to developing countries. Good. But the moment you start digging and analyzing how they have defined climate finance, you find that 50% used to be development finance. Okay? So the money given to developing countries as part of overseas development assistance, whether it's to build a school or to build a hospital or to give loan for energy infrastructure, have been rebranded as climate finance. The another 20% is basically money they gave because they wanted return. So it was a loan on market rate. 70% done. And 30% could be classified as climate finance because they were additional. For example, money given to make investment in climate resilient agriculture or for building a seawall. So of the 100 billion headline that all of us saw, only about 30 billion could be classified as climate finance if we look at following parameter. Was it exactly for climate benefit? Was it additional? Would those investments have happened without, those investments have happened if there was a market return? Okay. So if you use the definitional lens of climate finance, then maybe only about 30% they met. 70% they gave because they just rebranded it. So this ambiguity in definition of climate finance is good for developing countries, and it is also good for developed countries. Okay. Developed countries can rebrand what they give to developing countries as climate finance, anything and everything. And developing countries are also interested in this ambiguity because they allows them to use this ambiguous definition as something to hold developed countries on account, okay? So that the disagreement and pressure can continue. So it's very, very politically convenient to both sides. Okay. I'll give you the example of India. Last year, India came out with its draft climate finance taxonomy, okay? Which basically is a document. You all should read that document also from the perspective of how a scientific document should not be written, okay? So journalism is also about looking at a document and seeing whether that document is garbage or it really makes sense. I will not call it a garbage, but certainly it is not a document that is expected of topic of such importance, where you are defining for a country what a climate finance is. Okay. Now, besides the quality of the document, if you look at the document, what India says is that India's climate taxonomy is defined based on India's stated position of climate and development priorities. It says, I will define climate finance if it aligns with my stated position on international negotiation. This is what it says. Okay, good. But what is India's stated position? India's stated position is that we will not reduce emission in absolute sense. This has been India's stated position. India has always said that developed countries should reduce emission. We will only improve our emission intensity. We will improve energy efficiency. We will improve emission intensity. We will invest in renewable energy. This has been India's stated position. Now, what is emission intensity? Essentially, emission intensity is how much money, how much emission is there for every dollar of GDP. So, for example, if India's emission intensity is 1 kg greenhouse gases or CO2 per dollar of GDP, India says, I will reduce it by 50% by 2030 and make it half a kg of CO2 emission every dollar of GDP. So India is saying, I'm going to enhance the efficiency of my economy, but I'm not going to reduce emission in absolute term. Absolute term will mean India's current emission is about 3 billion ton. India is not pledging that it will reduce it by 2 billion ton. Unlike Europe or developed countries who are giving absolute emission targets. Now, with this boundary now, India has defined what is climate finance. Now, understand the implication of that, okay? The implication is that India will, anything which is leading to efficiency enhancement or avoidance of emission will fall under India's definition of climate finance. That is renewable energy, electric vehicles, energy efficiency. These will fall under India's definition of climate finance, and India therefore will attract money for these kind of activities. What will not be included is anything that closes down fossil fuel. Closing of coal mines, closing of oil and gas infrastructure, closing of thermal power plant, banning of internal combustion engine. These will not fall under the definition of climate finance according to India's taxonomy. Okay. In Europe, on the opposite, the biggest amount of money right now is going into closing of fossil fuel infrastructure, thermal power plant and coal mines. So the way you define climate finance right now is very much dependent on the political aspect of climate change. It has nothing to do with climate impact or what is required to mitigate climate change. Okay? So countries have decided their own boundaries on how I want to define climate finance, how they want to define climate mitigation and adaptation broadly, and then they have decided this is the way we are going to attract money. Okay? So the first is that. Now, if you think mitigation is a problem, okay, think about adaptation. The disagreement on what is climate adaptation is even more intense. Okay? So I'm going to ask all of you, is wastewater treatment plant a climate finance project? Anyone? Putting up a wastewater treatment plant in Chennai, is it a climate finance project? Why? Anyone?
I think more than climate finance, it's more about pollution control.
It is.
And now, to establish whether it's a climate finance or not, you have to understand whether that treatment plant, whether that problem of water pollution is directly linked with climate change or not.
Yes.
So if that is established, then it's climate.
It is established because wastewater treatment plants also emit methane. So and it emits methane, and you are right, it cleans water, which is an environmental problem. It is solving an environmental problem, and it is also solving a climate problem. Should it be climate finance? No, you need a lot of capital. The question here is, you now have, in climate field, what is called as a dual objective projects. Okay? So I'm going to give you another example. Is piped water supply to a village in Tamil Nadu be called climate adaptation?
I would think so.
Okay. Just raise hand. How many of you think a piped water supply is climate adaptation? Okay. Why it is not development? Isn't supplying piped water supply to a village in Tamil Nadu a pure development alternative, imperative?
It is definitely development, but climate finance is more of mitigation and adaptation.
Yeah.
Supplying pure water to a village, so it doesn't address any long-term issue that the village is facing. We're not addressing something related to that, because climate finance should look at both the aspects of adaptation also and mitigation of climate change.
No, it doesn't need to. It can separately look at mitigation and it can separately look at adaptation. Finance it is not only about project in which both mitigation and adaptation has to happen. It can happen separately. Okay. So I am giving you example of a piped water supply. Someone can argue because of climate change, there is going to be variability in rainfall. There's going to be variability in watershed. There's going to be reduction in groundwater or flow of the stream. There's uncertainty in water supply. And therefore, a piped water supply will bring certainty on water. Therefore, it is climate adaptation. Okay? One strand of argument can be that. The other strand of argument can be, no, it is not climate. It is development. And it should happen in business as usual. It is the responsibility of the government to ensure that everyone should have clean and secured supply of drinking water. Okay.
It is definitely development, but if the pure water that is supplied to the village is not being used sustainably, then you cannot term it as climate finance.
So you are moving to the second degree of argument, whether the water supply is sustainable or not. Okay? So what I'm trying to say is this, that today, on every project and every activity which is related to adaptation, mitigation, I think we can narrow the disagreement we have on mitigation and what climate finance means from mitigation perspective. But narrowing the gap on definition of adaptation or resilience, where climate finance should go, is almost impossible today. I'll give you an example. I was going through the state action plan on climate change, which many states have made. As you know, most states have been asked to make state action plan on climate change. I'm giving you the example what they have included in a state action plan as adaptation. Piped water supply, subsidized food, employment guarantee scheme, sea wall, weather station, water canal, bus stop, metro system, conservation projects. So state, and it is, someone can say, no, metro project is very important. It is reducing emission from private transport. Shouldn't it be a climate finance project? So I am giving you the stories that need to be written. Climate finance is not a simple narrative which is going around today, which is about that developed countries is not giving money to developing country. This is what the story of climate finance is today. You pick up a newspaper, most of the story on climate finance is this. Okay? It is not digging deep to demand or understand where is the problem of climate finance, why money is not coming to climate finance. Okay? Money is not coming because we cannot even agree on definition of climate finance universally. Okay? We broadly agree, but the moment you start asking for measurement, parameters, what should be included and what should be excluded, it doesn't exist. I'm yet to read a good story on India's draft climate taxonomy. In my way, how absurd it is. How can political position define what is climate taxonomy? Okay? Climate finance taxonomy. Okay. So that is the point number one I want to make, that the story is how should we define climate finance? Who benefits from ambiguity? These are important things to understand and write about. The second thing is how much money we are talking about, climate finance. Okay? You will see a lot of numbers being thrown around. Again, the number depends on definition, how you define climate finance, but most credible data shows that to meet 1.5 degree target, which I feel is now not possible because we have already hit 1.5 degrees. Maybe the world has a fighting chance to meet 2 degrees Celsius target, but 1.5, I'm just giving you an example of how much money is required because there are credible calculations. To meet 1.5 degree Celsius target, the world needs every year about $6 to $9 trillion of investment. Okay? $6 to $9 trillion of investment is required every year to remain on 1.5 degree Celsius trajectory. Okay? In 2023, the latest data that is available, the climate finance across the world was $1.9 trillion. Again, it depends on definition. I'm not sure that the way this was calculated would be universally accepted because the definition varies, as I have explained to you. Okay? So it was 1.9 trillion. The requirement is 6 to 9. In 2023, it was $1.9 trillion. So of climate finance that flowed into the global market. So therefore, the current flow of climate finance is about 20 to 30% of what is required. Okay? This is where it is. What about India? And then about 80% of this money is going to China, Western Europe, and United States. These three, East Asia, Western Europe, and Northern America takes about 80% of climate finance. So the three headline number that I have given you is $6 to $9 trillion requirement, $1 to $9 trillion that is currently flowing, and 80% of what is flowing in East Asia, North America, and Western Europe. This is the number. What about India? Last week, Niti Aayog came out with a 10-volume report on India's pathway to net zero. And I'll encourage all of you to read that report, at least the executive summary, if you don't want to read those 10-volume, 1,000 pages report. Okay? That says that India needs $22.7 trillion By 2070, for the next 45 years, India needs $22.7 trillion to meet its net zero commitments. But the report again goes on to say that of this $22.7 trillion, $14.7 trillion will be funded by market because it will make economic sense. So people will make money and therefore they will make that investment. Whether it is in electric cars or renewable energy or battery storage, people will make money and $14.7 trillion will come from market investment. Only $8.1 trillion is additionally required, which market will not provide. Market will not able to make that investment. Okay? Now, $8.1 trillion in next 45 years translates into $180 billion every year. Okay? So the fourth number that I am giving it to you is $180 billion per year is the climate finance requirement of India. Additional climate finance requirement of India. Okay? Now let us look at these numbers. Are these really large numbers? Are these impossible numbers that we are talking about? $6 to $9 trillion, $180 billion per year for India. Are these really difficult numbers that we can't provide? The world GDP today is $120 trillion. So the climate finance requirement is 5 to 7.5% of global GDP. $180 billion per year requirement for India is exactly equal to 5% of India's current GDP. So while the $1 trillion might look big, $6 to $9 trillion, and $1 billion might look big for India, in terms of how much money we have as an economy, these numbers are not too big. Okay? 5 to 7% of GDP is something the world can afford, and I'll give you the reason why. Today, we spend $8 trillion every year buying oil, gas, and coal. The world spends $8 trillion every year. We make $1 trillion additional investment in getting more oil, coal, and gas. That makes it $9 trillion. And then we give $7 trillion in fossil fuel subsidy, which includes health and environmental cost. So IMF has recently come out with a report on fossil fuel subsidy, and it pegs fossil fuel subsidy at $7 trillion. 9 plus 7 is $16 trillion. Our climate finance requirement is $6 to $9 trillion. So today, we are spending certainly $9 trillion on fossil fuel and $7 trillion in subsidies, which is double the climate finance requirement. So we are spending more in harming the environment and climate than in saving the environment. This is a very simple arithmetic that I wanted to bring in front of you. So when people say, no, we can't afford climate finance, it is just too much, that there's not so much money is available, you start digging and you find that money is available. It's just that it is not prioritized. It is not going where it is required. You know how much money the world spends on alcohol every year? We spend about $2 trillion on alcohol. How much we spend on defense? 2.5% of our global GDP. How much is the bill of tourism industry? $10 trillion. So once you start deciding what is your priority, you will find that money. Right now, I don't think our priorities are right. We are taking, as if we will solve climate change without prioritizing climate change. That, we want to have business as usual and still solve climate change. That's not going to happen. We don't have that Goldilocks that people talk about. That period is not there. It was there 30 years back. If we could have transitioned our economy 30 years back, we could have done more or less business as usual, and it still would have been able to, bring us on par to 2 degrees Celsius. Not now. Okay? So there is enough money because the requirement of climate finance is not that great. It's 5 to 7% of GDP. Okay? And therefore, the point is that if people are saying that we will not be able to meet climate finance, or developing countries cannot invest in climate because they don't have money, I think people will have to really look hard on the finance flows and market. That's another story that you all should be writing about. And therefore, if it is not such a big money, the question we need to ask is, what is stopping its flow? What is it that is impeding the flow in climate action, flow of money in climate action? And this brings me to the core argument that I want to make today. Okay? The reality is this: capital does not flow where the need is greatest. Okay? I'm giving you a tagline. Okay? Capital does not flow where the need is the greatest. And you can sit down, do an assignment at ACJ, okay, listing down the greatest requirement for Chennai and how much money is going on those greatest requirements. And you will get an answer. Okay? Capital flows where return, both political capital and market capital, okay, flows where return is shortest, most visible, and certain. Okay? So you want, from a government perspective, quick visibility, okay, from market perspective, quick return, and some certainty. A politician will do a metro project if he thinks that he's going to get votes. A company is going to invest in that metro project if he's going to get a return of 7, 8, 10% every year. That's how market works. It's a very simple philosophy. It doesn't go if, suppose, the return is going to be 10 years down the line. The politician will not invest, nor the market will. Okay? So the fact is that market today, prices risk and return and certainty. It doesn't price a social outcome, environmental outcome, or intergenerational justice. These are not the terms that market understand. Okay? But they need to understand. That's where I started by saying the narrative will have to change. Okay? Because social outcome, environmental outcome, intergenerational equity, intergenerational justice, these are important terms for flourishing and survival of humanity. Okay? These are not academic terms. These are important terms that should be written, rewritten, and rewritten. So let me give you an example of how perverse is the market. Okay? I'm using this term, it's a very strong term, but I need to use this term. Today, the most vulnerable region in the world, whether you take island states, Bangladesh, African countries, okay, are precisely the ones who have the worst sovereign rating, highest risk premium, and highest currency risk. It means that the most vulnerable and impacted due to climate change, where the need for climate finance is the highest, have the highest cost of capital. And I give this example all the time. I was in Addis Ababa, and I went to, I was talking to a few bankers in a meeting, and I said, why don't you get solar roof on every building of Addis? And he said that, do you know what is the interest rate on buying a solar panel in Addis Ababa or Dar es Salaam? It is 18%. Okay? In Europe, it is 2% or 3%. In India, it is about 10%. So just to install a solar panel, which is going to supply electricity, but also decarbonize the electricity grid, which is also a global good, a Tanzanian pays 6 times more interest rate than a European, and an Indian pays double or triple the interest rate than an American. So this is the perverse logic of the market. The most impacted by climate change is paying the heaviest cost of mitigating that impact. Okay. Now, if we do not reverse this logic, no investment can come in developing country. Because the market is going to price out the capital that is required in developing countries for mitigation or for adaptation. And this is what we see everywhere now. Okay? Therefore, 80% of climate finance is going to China, North America, and Western Europe, because the rate of capital is so low. And according to market, those are risk-free market. Now, this logic has to be inversed. If you want the world to come together and Indians to invest, and in fact, I always say that without changing the architecture of global finance, India will not be able to meet some of the things it wants to do on climate adaptation. Mitigation we will, because mitigation will make market sense. But adaptation, where money is required from public sources, India will not be able to meet. It will not be able to save tribals of Jhabua or hill dwellers in Himalayas, because the extreme rainfall and infrastructure loss itself will be so huge that government can't make those investments. Last year, the total loss in Himachal Pradesh because of extreme rainfall in 3 months was 2 lakh crores. The GDP of Himachal Pradesh is 2 lakh crore. In 1 year, the loss because of extreme rainfall in Himachal Pradesh was 2 lakh crore. So this market logic that we have right now will not lead us to the kind of solutions we want on climate change. So let me end by saying that climate change is not just failing to deliver finance, okay? It is actually actively increasing outflow from developing countries. Developing countries are paying more to developed countries because of higher interest rate than how much climate finance they are receiving from developed countries. So there's an inverse flow that is happening right now. How can we do this? How do we reverse this logic? Okay. Let me say that the market would like all of us to believe that the logic of market is sound, that it doesn't change. Okay. This is what most economists would like us to believe, that the fundamental of economics is correct. It is return and reward. Okay. This is what every economist will tell you. Okay. But the fact is that market always abandons its own risk-reward logic all the time. Okay? They do it when power, narrative, regulation, or government guarantees dominate fundamentals. This is not a sacrosanct principle, risk and reward. Okay? I can give you examples after example where this fundamental of risk and reward vanishes when the power dominates, narratives change, okay? When regulations come, all these vanishes. And you can think about what happens during war. What happens to the market logic during war? What happened of the market logic during pandemic, which we all experienced? So changing the there's no sacrosanct logic right now in market which says that risk and reward should be the only principle on which things should happen. That social and environmental outcome is not important. That intergenerational justice is not important. Okay? And therefore, the question is not whether market can be redirected. They have always been redirected. The question is whether governments have the political will to redirect them. Okay? And that is, again, the story to write. Does government, both in developing world, developed world, state governments, local governments, have the political will to redirect market? Okay? Do the world has the ability to relook at the global financial architecture? Okay? But you can say that in Trump era it is not possible. Fine, I can take that. Okay? But that's not what is going to take us far. Okay? And there are many things that is required, and I'm going to give you 1 or 2 examples what can be done. Okay? First of all, climate has to become a mandate. Okay? We need to have mandate and standards to realign market incentives, okay, with climate outcome. So you will have to say that there is a price on carbon. If you put price on carbon, then capital will chase low carbon emission. Okay. If building code, you make building code and says that energy efficiency is mandatory, the market will invest in energy efficiency. Okay. So number one requirement is mandate and standards to realign market incentive. That is the lowest hanging fruit. That is being done, and it should be done more and more in every aspect of our society, where the incentive should have climate outcome. The market incentive, apart from return, should have climate outcome. Second, climate has to be enshrined as a fiduciary duty of private sector, of companies. Right now, the fiduciary duty of company is only responsibility to their shareholder. How much money they can return, they can provide to their shareholder is the only fiduciary duty. That has to change. The fiduciary duty will have to be redefined in terms of social and environmental outcome. It is fine, you are responsible for your shareholder, but you are also responsible for making sure where your shareholder lives, where your community lives, okay? The kind of environmental and climate impact you have. So the number second is fiduciary duty. And third is all kind of financial instrument that can reduce the risk premium on investment like adaptation, resilience, hard-to-abate sector. And there is enough money to do that. Okay? So I'm just giving you 3 things that is very much doable. Okay? 1, mandate and standard to realign market incentive. 2nd, redefining fiduciary duty. 3rd, making sure that governments are investing to reduce risk in sectors where market money is not going to come. Okay? Let's do these things. These are not revolutionary ideas. Okay? These are pretty much doable ideas that governments are not doing. Thank you very much.